Good morning and Merry Christmas. Before we begin the meditation, what did Adam say on the day before Christmas? It's Christmas, Eve. And if you didn't like that one, you'll like this one even less. What's the best possible Christmas present you could ever get? A broken drum. You just can't beat it. So let's take that smile on our faces, as Garrett guided us last time, and then gently close your eyes or have a soft gaze to the floor. Taking a deep breath and releasing on the exhale, feeling yourself relax, settling into the chair. And again, another deep breath, inhale. And on the exhale, just letting go as much as possible and allowing your awareness to descend from thinking down below the neck into your heart area. Unhooking from thought for a few minutes here. And just entering the space of your own heart. Noticing the rise and fall of your breath in its very natural rhythm. And Jesus said to us shortly before he left the world, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." So peace is one of the most important gifts of Christ, and one of the most important gifts of Christmas. And as Jesus said, "I do not give to you as the world gives," because there is a deep peace in Christ, in the universal Christ consciousness, regardless of what name it goes by. This oneness of the Supreme that we affirm in the first unity principle. There is a deep, deep peace. And peace is the foundation of joy and of love. In the St. Francis prayer, "O Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is darkness, light." All of that full prayer follows out from the foundation. Let me be an instrument of thy peace. So invite this peace into you now. This peace that comes directly from Christ, from God. And centering your awareness on this peaceful stillness in the depths of the heart. this peace that underlies and transcends all of the activity and all of the tribulations of the world. This peace is awakened in the silence of the heart. The peace that passeth all understanding. And in this line we have both an indication of the depth of peace that Christ brings. It's beyond understanding. It is simply there in the heart. It awakens in the depths of the stillness of the heart. We also have in this line, peace that passeth all understanding, a hint as to how to arrive at this peace, which is to go beyond understanding, to go beyond the conceptual mind. For the mind is a wonderful servant, but not a great master. The true master is Christ, centered in the heart. And so releasing thoughts, feelings, and focusing our awareness in the inner stillness. The gateway to infinite peace. And resting in this peace. With each breath, entering more deeply into this inner peace of Christ in the heart. heart is like a spiritual lens, receiving the peace of God and radiating it out into the world. And as we move into this Christmas season and holiday season, let us each be an instrument of peace in all of the busyness, in all of the celebration and fun and merriment, and children and grandchildren and family and friends. Let me be a shining instrument of the peace of God. As Charles Fillmore wrote about it, the calm poise of the Master. Let us carry this calm poise of the Master into the holiday season, radiating peace. As Charles Fillmore said, mastery, power, and peace, which were mine in the beginning, are now restored unto me. I am peace. Om Shanti 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 Nirvana Paramam. Om. Peace. Peace. Peace.
So before I start, just to get this out of the way so there's no distractions, I did get my hair done. And if you hadn't noticed, Santa Claus is in the congregation this morning. Please, Santa, we welcome you. So now that those distractions are out of the way, I'll give you a little heads up about this particular talk. It's a little different than other talks we've done. I'm going to share 3 different sharings, 2 stories of my favorite Christmas stories. And then the last piece will just be my own reflections on patient anticipation as we are in the Advent week of joy, and 3 days from Christmas, we're in that patient anticipation of what is to come. The first story I'm going to share is about my grandmother, and when she was 13 years old. And the second story is a true story from World War I. In between the stories, Jay is going to do a little musical interlude. So listen to the stories, and the invitation is during the music just to be in the reflective place to see what is stirring in you, what has heart and meaning for you from the stories that are given. Sound good? Okay. So my grandmother's story. She was 13 years old, and it was World War I. And the men were being called away to war, and she lived with her foster mother, Mrs. Sterling. And Mrs. Sterling's son had been called away to war too. And it was really tough times. In fact, Mrs. Sterling's son had bought this house in the summertime, and he was going to rebuild it, and they had moved in, and there were no glass panes in the windows. And then he got called away to war, and it was wintertime, but before he left, he boarded the windows up to try to keep things warm in the house. It was a true room house, and there were only Mrs. Sterling, my grandmother's foster mother, and my grandmother at 13 years old. It was cold, and it was pretty miserable, and money was tight. And it was Christmas morning, and my grandmother woke up, and it was like any other day. It didn't feel like Christmas at all, because normally they would have a Christmas tree, and one year they even had a Christmas tree with candles on it. And my grandmother's foster aunt had brought these beautiful Christmas ornaments with the little scenes in them, and they were all shimmery that Christmas, and they hung from the tree, and the lights would just shine bright, and it was a glorious Christmas. And they had stockings, and Santa had brought coal for good luck, and sometimes Grandma would even get an orange or an apple in her stocking. But not this Christmas. There was nothing there was no tree, but there was no presents either. There were no stockings, and it was cold. The potbelly stove was just starting to get the fire going, but the wind was coming through. Just so you know, my grandmother her mother died when she was about 2 years old, and she was put into a foster home, but when she was 2. And then this woman, Mrs. Sterling, saw her there and had met her father. And so Mrs. Sterling said, "I want to take your child and raise her." And so my grandmother's father was in another town, and usually he sent a gift, at least a present. And sometimes her auntie would send a gift, but not this Christmas. One time Santa Claus brought this pink little tea set, but not this Christmas. That was when she was younger. This Christmas there was nothing, and she was walking around just feeling very forlorn. And then suddenly, Mrs. Sterling said, "Ah, wait just a minute." And she went back into the other room and she brought out this present, this large gift. And it was wrapped in the most beautiful paper and a big shiny bow. And my grandmother's eyes lit up. And Mrs. Sterling said, "I don't know who this is from, but it arrived in the mail the other day." And my grandmother takes it and carefully unwraps it, and she pulls out this photograph, this framed photograph of a soldier boy, all in his uniform, looking quite nice. My grandmother got a big smile on her face. This was the boy that my grandmother at 13 years old and her friend had found these pen pals. They decided to be pen pals, and this was the boy she had been writing to during the war. Alice, her friend, and her had read in the newspaper that these boys were lonely and they needed someone to write to them, so they decided to write. And this boy, this soldier boy, sent my grandmother this gift on this Christmas, unbidden. My grandmother looked at it and she was full of joy. Mrs. Sterling was over there going, "What is this going on here now?" In the package was a letter from the soldier boy saying, "I'd love for you to come visit me someday." And my grandmother said that put the fear in me because I was only 13 years old and he didn't know that. So the story concludes because my grandmother was so full of joy. She said, "That's the best Christmas gift I could have ever gotten." And at the same time, I had to write to him and tell him the truth, that his pen pal was only 13 years old. What I take away from this story myself is that the joy that my grandmother gave to that soldier boy by writing to him letter after letter after letter was returned to her in the joy she received on that Christmas day when she thought no gifts were coming her way. a true story of Christmas time. I just received this letter from my brother. He's on the front lines in the war, another story from World War I. It reads, "My dear sister Janet, it is 2 a.m. and most of the men are asleep in their dugouts. Yet I couldn't sleep myself before writing to you the wonderful news of Christmas Eve. In truth, what happened seemed almost like a fairy tale. And if I hadn't been through it myself, I would have scarcely believed it. Just imagine, while you and the family sung holiday songs before the fire there in London, I did the same with enemy soldiers here on the battlefield of France. As I wrote before, there have been little serious fighting of late. The first battles of the war left so many dead that both sides have held back until replacements could come from home. So we've mostly stayed in our trenches and waited. But what a terrible waiting it has been, knowing that at any moment the shells might land and explode beside us in the trench, killing or maiming several men, and in the daylight not lifting our heads above the ground for fear of a sniper's bullet. And the rain, it has fallen and fallen almost daily. Of course, it collects in our trenches, and we must bail it out with pots and pans. And when the rain has come, mud, a good foot deep or more, it splatters and cakes and constantly sucks our boots even deeper into the mud. Through all this, we couldn't help feeling curious about the German soldiers across the way. After all, they faced the same dangers we did and slogged about in the same muck. What more, their first trenches were only 50 yards from ours. Between us lay no man's land, bordered on both sides with barbed wire. Yet they were close enough we could sometimes hear their voices. Of course, we hated them when they killed our friends, but other times we joked about them and almost felt like we had something in common. And now it seems they felt the same. Just yesterday morning, Christmas Eve day, we had our first cold freeze. Cold as we were, it was quite welcome because at least the mud froze solid and everything was twinged white with frost, just like the perfect Christmas weather. During the day, there was little shelling or rifle fire from either side, and as darkness fell on our Christmas Eve, the shooting stopped, and it was entirely silence, something we hadn't heard in months. We hoped it might be a promise of a peaceful holiday, but we didn't count on it. We'd been told the Germans might attack and try to catch us off guard. I went to the dugout to get a little rest, and lying on my cot, I must have drifted asleep. All at once, my friend John was shaking me awake, saying, "Come and see. See what the Germans are doing." I grabbed my rifle, stumbled out into the trenches, and stuck my head cautiously above the sandbags. I never hoped to see a stranger or more lovely sight. Clusters of tiny lights were shining all along the German line, left and right as far as we could see. "What is it?" I asked, and John answered, "Christmas trees." And so it was. The Germans had placed Christmas trees in front of their trenches, lit by candle or lanterns like beacons of goodwill. And then we heard their voices raise in song, "Silent night, holy night." I've never heard one lovelier or more meaningful in that quiet, clear night. It's dark, softened by the first quarter moon. When the song finished, the men in our trenches applauded. Yes, British soldiers applauding Germans. Then one of our men started singing, and we all joined in. The first Noel. In truth, we sounded not as good as the Germans with their fine harmonies, but they responded with enthusiastic applause and their own, and then began another. O Tannenbaum, O Tannenbaum. Then we replied, O come all ye faithful, but this time they joined in this with the same words in Latin. British and Germans harmonizing across no man's land. I would have thought nothing could be more amazing, but what came next was more so. English, come over, we heard one of them shout. You know shoot, we know shoot. There in the trenches, we looked at each other in bewilderment. Then one of us shouted jokingly, you come over here. To our astonishment, we saw two figures rise from the trenches, climb over the barbed wire, and advanced unprotected across no man's land. One of them called out, send an officer to talk. I saw one of our men lift his rifle to ready, and no doubt others did the same, but the captain called out, hold the fire. Then we climbed out. The captain climbed out and went to meet the Germans halfway. We heard them talking, and a few minutes later, the captain came back with a German cigar in his mouth. We've agreed there will be no shooting before midnight tomorrow, he announced. Across the way, we could make out groups of 2 or 3 men starting out of the trenches and coming toward us. Then some of us were climbing out too, and in minutes more, there we were in no man's land, over 100 soldiers and officers on each side, shaking hands with men we'd been trying to kill just a few hours earlier. Before long, a bonfire was built, and around it we mingled. Only a couple of our men knew German, but more of the Germans knew English, and I asked them why that was. Because many of us worked in England, he said. Before all of this, I was a waiter at Hotel Cecil. Perhaps I waited on your table. Perhaps you did, I said, laughing. He told me he had a girlfriend in London, and that the war had interrupted their plans for marriage. I told him, don't worry, we'll have you beat by Easter and then you can go back and marry your girl. He laughed at that. Then he asked if I would send her a postcard. He'd give it to me later, and I promised I would. Another German had been a porter at Victoria Station. He showed me a picture of his family back in Munich. His sister was lovely. I thought I should like to meet her someday. He beamed and said he would like that very much and gave me his family address. Even those who could not converse could still exchange gifts, our cigarettes for their cigars, our tea for their coffee, our corned beef for their sausages. Newspapers changed hands too, and Germans howled with laughter at ours. They assured us that France was finished, and Russia nearly beaten too. We told them that was nonsense, and one of them said, well, you believe your newspapers and we'll believe ours. Clearly, they were lied to. Yet after meeting these men, I wondered how truthful our own newspapers were. These had not been savage barbarians we'd read so much about. They are not the men that we had made enemies. They are men with homes and families, hopes and fears, principles, and yes, love of country. In other words, men like ourselves. Why are we led to believe otherwise? As it grew late, a few more songs were traded around the fire, and then all joined in for more songs. Then we parted with promises to meet tomorrow, and even some talked of a football match. I was just starting back to the trenches when an older German clutched my arm. "My God," he said, "why cannot we have peace and all go home?" I told him gently that you must ask your emperor. He looked at me then searchingly. "Perhaps, my friend, but also we must ask our hearts." And so, my dear sister, tell me, has there ever been such a more beautiful Christmas Eve in all of history? And what does it all mean, this impossible befriending of enemies? For the fighting here, of course, it means regrettably little. Decent fellows these soldiers may be, but they follow orders and we do the same. Besides, we are here to stop their army and send it home, and never could we shrink that duty. Still, one cannot help imagine what would happen if the spirit shown here were caught by the nations of the world. Of course, disputes must always arrive. But what if our leaders were to offer well wishes in place of warnings, songs in place of slurs, presents in place of reprisals? Would not all war end at once? All nations say they want peace. Yet on this Christmas morning, I wonder if we want it quite enough. Your loving brother, Tom. Patient anticipation. From Rumi. The body is like Mary, and each of us has a Jesus inside. Who is not in labor, holy labor? Every creature is. See the value of true art when the earth or a soul is in the mood to create beauty. For the witness might then for a moment know, beyond any doubt, God is really there within, so innocently drawing life from us with her umbilical universe, infinite existence, though also needing to be born. Yes, God also needs to be born. Birth from a hand's loving touch, birth from a song, from a dance, breathing life into this world. The body is like Mary, and each of us has a Christ within. Christ is born anew every Christmas. And for those of us committed on a spiritual path, we are called to be mothers of God, as Meister Eckhart said, which means we are all to be Marys. Last week, Will's teaching was, "May my heart become a manger through which Christ is born in me." Remember that? He encouraged us to meditate and reflect on this teaching this past week. Now, in this present week of Advent, which is of joy, and with only 3 days before Christmas, my question to you is, who is this Jesus who is to be born through you? Who is the Christ to be born in you and through you? When we are consenting to God, then like Mary, we are all in the process of birthing. I've often wondered what Mary felt like during her pregnancy, labor, and birth. What were her days like just prior to birthing? Patient anticipation? Will and I just had a granddaughter. She'll be 1 in January. And we spent the weeks before with my daughter as her baby was there ready to be born. I can tell you that patient anticipation was not always what it was. So, where was Mary? What was it like for her? Was she in joy at this time of the Advent, waiting for the birth? Or was it just downright difficult? Caesar had ordered a census, the first of its kind, because the Roman government wanted to make sure everyone was paying taxes. To register, Joseph and Mary had to travel from Nazareth to Bethlehem, as that was the town that Joseph's family was from and had originally come from. And it was a journey of 112 kilometers, about 70 miles. Can you imagine, all the women in here who have birthed babies, can you imagine riding on the back of a donkey for 3 to 8 days for 112 kilometers? Believe me, after having 2 children, that's difficult. How many can agree? Yeah. And sadly, there are a lot of refugees right now, currently around the world, pregnant women who are fleeing their countries, fleeing violence, maybe not riding on the donkey, but I just want to bring them into our awareness. So as we're here in this safe place, just honoring the safety of what we have and wishing them well and praying that they too find safety is really an important thing for us to remember now and as we move into the Christmas holiday with so much joy and so many blessings in our lives. I imagine that the gestational waiting period of Mary, Mother of Jesus, was probably no different than the billions of other women's pregnancy stories throughout history. The skin around Mary's belly was swelling as she held the weight of her child. She felt Jesus squirm and press against her organs, elbows coming up into her ribs, and his little feet pushing against her bladder. She was probably short of breath often and had trouble sleeping at night in the uncomfortable positions trying to find comfort. She probably wondered if she could stretch any more, if her body could stretch any more to contain her son in her womb, and her thoughts surely brought reflection to all he would become in his life, as every mother has wondered as they carry their child in their womb. And although I'm speaking of a female's physical experience of birthing, this miraculous process does not exclude men, nor anyone who has not birthed a child, because on the spiritual path we are all called to consent to God and carry the divine in the womb of our hearts, just as Mary carried Jesus in her womb. And wherever we are in the process of being pregnant with the divine Jesus, we are to bring this highest consciousness into the world, into practical forms. Christ is born anew every Christmas. As we quickly approach his birthday, there is an opportunity for us all to join Mary in the birthing process. Birthing isn't easy. As many women in this room can attest, some births are easier than others. And there are different thoughts and beliefs about what Mary's labor was like. Many of the church fathers, including St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, held that Mary, free of sin, was surely spared the pain of childbirth. We unfortunately don't have Mary's account of her experience of birthing Jesus. In the Quran, which is part of the Abrahamic traditions, it's Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. In the Quran we read, "The labor pains came upon her by the trunk of a palm tree. She said, 'I wish I had died before this and been completely forgotten.' Whereupon he called from beneath her, 'Do not worry, your Lord has placed a stream beneath you. And shake the trunk of a palm tree toward you, and it will drop ripe dates by you. So eat and drink and be consoled.' And we hear no more about birth pains after that. In our current times, just a side note, researched randomized trials have found that eating dates in late pregnancy may increase cervical ripening, dilation. So there you go, from antiquity all the way up to here, the medicinal healing components. So don't expect this spiritual birthing to be without its pains and tribulations. This is the human condition. And the challenges of life provide us with the grist for the spiritual mill to stretch and grow ourselves. The spiritual path is like pregnancy, labor, and birthing. It's hard work. It's uncomfortable. Sometimes we have morning sickness. Sometimes we have ecstatic joy. Sometimes we're in fear. Often we're in love. We evolve into more compassionate, loving, empathetic, caring people by being on the spiritual path and really working the practices. The gift is a new form of Christ that is birthed within you and through you. The unexpected gifts in each of the stories that I've just shared are that my grandmother at 13 didn't know the gift she would receive from the soldier boy, and it went well beyond the photograph wrapped in the pretty paper. And the soldiers in the peace treaty story didn't know they would receive a gift of joyful respite through human connection with the enemy that also this whole story became a gift of hope and possibility to the world. And just also as a side note, that this wasn't just one battlefield. It started spontaneously happening on many battlefields on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Sometimes going through Christmas Day it was held, and sometimes some of the battlefields held that peace treaty until mid-January. There were thousands of soldiers in this peace treaty. It's become an archetypal story, truly, that we can hold the possibility that way in our heart for peace. And Mary, she didn't fully know what her baby Jesus would bring to her life and to all of humanity. Mary had no idea that I would be sharing this story with you today, and what a gift her wisdom brings to us. And none of us know what is the unfolding in our lives. Truly, God is the only one that knows. But if we are consciously present of the Jesus within, and we stay committed to the path, including the hard work, then Christ will be born within each of us over and over and over again. So in closing, I just invite you to gently close your eyes or have a soft gaze to the floor. And just breathe in to all that's been shared. See what's stirring in your own body. Not only your mind, but your heart. What has truth and meaning for you through these Christmas stories? What resonates? And I leave you with this question that I encourage you to meditate and reflect on over Christmas and into the new year. Who and what is the particular form of Christ that is being born through you at this time of Christmas? Who and what is the particular form of Christ that is being born through you? Have patience and compassion with your own birthing process, just as Mary had to do. And just as Mary was called to her particular divine purpose, so are each of us called to the unique divine purpose in our life. My prayer for each of you today is that all the Christmas blessings, expected and unexpected gifts of peace and joy and love on Christmas and the days to come may be joyfully received and welcomed in your heart. Amen.
Oh dear, the eye that softly looks. Oh dear, the heart that fondly loves. Oh, but a tender babe thou art, the graces all grow up in thee. Oh dear, the wind that pulls the trees. Oh dear, the rain that softly falls. Oh, but a tender babe thou art, the graces all grow up with thee. Oh, sweet the night that holds your name. Oh, sweet the star that truly shines. Oh, but a tender babe thou art, the graces all grow up with thee. Oh dear, the eye that softly looks. Oh dear, the heart that fondly loves. Oh, but a tender babe thou art, the graces all grow up with thee. La 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 la. La 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 la. Oh, hey, all grow up with thee. Oh, fondly, the eye that softly looks, and the dear heart that fondly loves. A tender babe thou art, the graces all grow up with thee.